Kshama's here, council member Kshama Sawant, and thank you for joining us. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you for having
Oh,
me.
fantastic.
Oh,
No, we're
indeed.
thrilled to have you.
Blessing,
I don't know if
blessing to
you
have
all
you.
get,
Blessing to have you.
yeah, this is fantastic. So we've just been talking with our distinguished colleague, lawyer and activist Connie Rice, about the sort of state of the election, what we're thinking about, how we think about what to do the day after, or maybe Friday, which is when I think at least Connie's waking up. I might try to stay in the bed till Friday, my darn self. That's a great idea. But what are you thinking? How have you been dealing with this whole evening? And what were your expectations? What are your thoughts? So on and so forth.
Yeah, as Connie was saying actually earlier, Florida, Texas, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, so many of these states are so close to call, and it's obvious that millions of working people and youth around the country are fearfully watching this election that should not have been too close to call, and are hoping for a decisive defeat of this deeply reactionary, anti-worker, racist president. And honestly, there's also a worry about a potential repeat of 2016 and facing a drawn out battle in which Trump and the right wing try every trick in the book to steal the election. And this is in spite of 100 million early votes and an unprecedented voter turnout. So I think in terms of your question, it's absolutely important what we do in the next 2 days. My organization, Socialist Alternative, for example, is organizing protests for tomorrow night across the country, saying don't let Trump steal the election. That's why it's important that some unions are talking about strike action if needed. The California Teachers Association is currently saying that the labor movement cannot accept another 2000-style stolen election, and some are even discussing a general strike if necessary, including in Seattle. And if necessary, we need to shut the system down to stop this. If Trump steps up his efforts, we know Trump's campaign has assembled an army of lawyers. Some of your speakers were talking about this. They've launched 40 lawsuits around the country. 10 million robocalls went out telling people to, quote, stay home and stay safe, end quote, which was, trying to deceive them into not voting. So we have to take the potential attempts by Trump and the right wing to sabotage the vote very seriously and go all out to defend the democratic process. But the other part of this is, of course, the analysis. I mean, it says a great deal about the thoroughly corporate Biden campaign and the Democratic Party that this election is close. And again, it's, the Democrats went all out to crush Bernie Sanders. And if they hadn't, we wouldn't be facing this right now. Because, let's face it, Bernie would very likely not have been in this situation that Biden is in tonight, in a close race with a historically abysmal president, because the campaign that Bernie was running on, a political revolution against the billionaire class, had enormous potential to energize and unite large sections of working people and young people. And in short, Bernie would have won. And so we cannot forget that this was exactly this pro-wealthy position, pro-corporate position of the Democratic Party that made millions of ordinary people either disenchanted from politics entirely or fodder for the Republicans and the right wing, because people are correctly angry at the status quo, but there's no alternative to the big business parties. It was no coincidence that the Tea Party developed under Obama, as Obama bailed out the banks rather than working people during the Great Recession. You had Brianna Joy Gray talk about the toll that the Great Recession took on so many millennials. And so I think our immediate task is to absolutely go all out to prevent Trump and the Republicans and the right wing from stealing the elections through all kinds of chicanery. We've seen voter fraud as well. So that's our first step. And then we need to, of course, talk about how we are going to really build mass movements to defeat Trump and to defeat Trumpism.
Mm.
Oh, I hear you, my dear sister. I mean, that's part of the anti-fascist coalition that has to stay in place now that the voting has already taken place. But what happens if Trump actually ends up with more votes? I mean, we still have to have an anti-fascist coalition, but it still says something about just how sick and blind so many of our fellow citizens are, and their contempt for neoliberal rule is intense, but it doesn't move to the left. it moves to the right. So that what happens is the crisis of the neoliberal rule is now just undeniable. There's just no doubt about that. It's hollowed out, it's shallow, it's vacuous, and yet they still were a major impediment against America's march to fascism. That's why many of us still promoted, at least voting for Biden. But now that it's very clear that it's so close, but Trump can still actually win, what happens if he actually has more votes? What do we do then?
I think the question already that we're facing, I mean, if Trump was to actually win, then of course this question that you've raised, Brother Dr. West, becomes the most palpable. But even now, the fact that we are in a close race itself is evidence enough for why we should be discussing this point about, you know, what is the way forward. And I would say, of course, that obviously there is a current of reactionary ideology, of right-wing ideas. And we, of course, don't want to have a romanticized view of America. But look, the reality is, of course, that the vast majority of American people, working people, are completely angry at the system. And as you said, the legitimacy of the main parties, both the corporate parties, is at an all-time low. What has been missing, though, is not that ordinary people don't understand that it's not in their interest to vote against Trump. What's been missing is an actual alternative to the Republican and the Democratic parties. I mean, there's been enormous potential for a new party for a working class, like that, a party that is accountable to working people, that is independent of the billionaire class. That potential was visible with the electrifying response that Bernie got to his campaign. But look at the historic setback from him capitulating in the way that he did to the Biden campaign and to the Democratic Party. And as Brother Dr. West, you yourself have said, while Ocasio-Cortez and now Cori Bush are crucial voices, and I agree with them on many, many issues that they have spoken up, and I really value their voices, they're still, as you said, locked inside a party that is simply not presenting a path forward for working people and the oppressed and the poor. I mean, who will represent the vast constituency of people who want to fight for the things that Bernie was calling for? You know, a real battle against Wall Street, to fund, to make universities free by taxing Wall Street, for Medicare for all, to ending student debt. Brianna was just talking about the massive burden of student debt. I mean, it is an abdication of responsibility on the left if we don't actually provide an alternative to represent them. And I'll say it even more clearly, who will represent the over 20 million young people who just months ago made history on the streets of America in the multiracial working class movement against racism and police violence? But not just that, the George Floyd protest really captured something much deeper in the consciousness of tens of millions of working people and young people, which is a complete disenchantment with the system itself and a search for a new way forward. So there's a real potential to build something outside of the Democratic Party, but it's not something that can stay in the abstract. It has to be an actual thing that we work for. And I'll just make a few more points. I mean, for the political pundits who say that it's too risky to begin to build a new party, that we have to settle for either of the Democrats or Republicans who represent the capitalist system, look how risky it has been to have a candidate like Biden. Look how risky it was to run somebody like Hillary Clinton, which is what gave rise to the Trump presidency, the con man that took office. Tonight could have been a straightforward victory against a failed president. And now we are going to spend this night in tremendous anxiety. And also I'll say, for those who say we cannot have independent left candidates at the federal level, but we should do it in municipal races, I can tell you, I've been in office as an outspoken socialist, not running within the Democratic Party, for 7 years nearly on the city council. I'm one socialist. There's 8 Democrats on the council. There's no danger of Republicans. And yet we have faced attack after attack from the Democratic establishment and from big business. In fact, right now, my council office is facing a recall attempt by big business and the right wing. So my point being that, yes, it will be difficult. Yes, there will be threats against any attempt to capture the anger that millions of people are facing. And the system and its representatives will always tell us, don't do that, it's not going to work. But we cannot afford to listen to them, all the way from the climate crisis to the pandemic to the recession. We cannot afford to wait.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
no, I
thank
hear you, my sister. I hear you, my dear sister. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.